Hi, it's David Casino. In the last episode, we built a bare bones Flutter app that can run on iPhones, Android devices, and the web. In today's episode, we're going to build upon that bare bones app and create the dashboard for BrainDump. I'm excited for today's episode because we're going to try something crazy. We're going to see if Cursor can build the dashboard using only a hand-drawn sketch that I did in my notebook. Can Cursor handle it? Let's find out. Okay, so over here you see the app that we built in the last episode. This is just bare bones, doesn't do anything yet, just says welcome to BrainDump, and we're going to try to build the user interface today. And I went ahead and drew this interface out on pen and paper. So I drew it in my notebook, I took a photo, I copied it to my Mac, and it's represented here in the screenshot. Now, I'm not a very good artist, as you can see. But hopefully Cursor will be able to take this sketch and turn it into usable code. I want to have a microphone button here in the center where the user will enter their brain dumps. There's going to be a little search button. This will be like a floating action button that's always present where the user can retrieve their brain dumps. And at the top here, you see the number of thoughts that are captured, the number of brain dumps. And then there's just going to be a simple scrollable list of all the brain dumps. It's going to have a timestamp and it's going to have the thought that you captured with your voice to text. So let's take this image and we're going to pull up Cursor here. Now I want to tell it which files I'm looking at. Normally when you open a new chat, it'll use the current file that you're on, or you can add it here manually. And we've only created 2 files so far, other than the default ones that come with Flutter. You've got main.dart where all your logic lives, and I have this launch JSON that I added some launch configurations. So we'll click on main.dart and we're going to just copy this file in here. Boom, it can take images, and let's ask it to build the dashboard. I'd like to build a dashboard that is sketched out in this image. That's it, let's just type that. Okay, so it's thinking. It is using Claude Sonnet, which is great. Yesterday, Claude was down, Anthropic was down, and so it was falling back to OpenAI. But today we've got Claude again. Certainly, I'll help you create a dashboard based on the sketch. We'll modify the existing homepage to include the elements shown on the sketch. Here's how we can update the code. Okay, so it created a variable thoughts capture 23, and if you look at my sketch, I just put in a placeholder number, but it actually used that, which is good. It's good to have some data in there. And then it's created, let's see, a list view, cool, that has all of the thoughts. And it just says time and the thought, okay. And then we've got our floating action button, and we've got another floating action button that is the add. So I guess this is going to be the microphone button. So let's just apply and see what it does. Okay, so we already kind of looked over this code. I'm just gonna hit accept. And I've already got the app running here, so I'm just going to save my code and see if it refreshes. Wow, that is pretty nice. So it basically created the dashboard from just a picture. Right now these buttons do nothing. You get a little animation when you click them, but this is pretty cool. This is kind of amazing that I can do this in such a short period of time. All right, so let's add something interesting. I know that eventually when we capture these thoughts, we're going to want to store them in some sort of data store. So let's create some sample data to make this look a little bit more real. I'd like to use more realistic data. Let's create some JSON, which is just a structured form of data. It's plain text. It's used by a lot of different applications that has 8 items. Each item should have a timestamp. I'll say a different timestamp. That spans 2 weeks. Okay, I'm getting very specific here. Let's see if you can handle all this. Each thought should also be random. Perhaps use lorem ipsum. Lorem ipsum is just sample code that's kind of Latin gibberish that will just give it some more of a realistic feel for each thought. Store the JSON in a variable so we can play with it. Okay, certainly I'll create a JSON with 8 items, each having a timestamp spanning 2 weeks and a random lorem ipsum thought. Okay. Oh wow, it actually did it. So it created this variable JSON data. I've got a bunch of thoughts in here. The time span starts April 1st and goes to April 15th. Wow, it actually got the timestamps correct. It's got this JSON decode, which will take that JSON and turn it into Dart code. Okay, and yeah, it's actually going to iterate through this. This is great. Okay, this looks fantastic. Let's try to see what this does. All right, so it added Dart convert. So we're going to accept that. That's just for the JSON. I can't quite reach that, so we'll get back to that later. Okay, it's got the JSON. This looks pretty simple and pretty straightforward, so let's just hit accept all. And we're going to save it. Oh, an error occurred. Field's thoughts has not been initialized. Okay, so let's figure out what the source of this error is. It looks like it's doing it in init state. So I'm just going to stop the app and try to run it from scratch. Sometimes the hot reload just doesn't find stuff. So let's try it from scratch. As you can see, the hot reload is pretty handy. You don't have to wait as long. And there it is. Wow. We've got our timestamp. We've got some kind of sample data. This is a scrollable list. This is awesome. Let's improve upon it a bit. So what you're seeing here is like an ISO 860 timestamp. It just has very, very precise data, and it has kind of more information than you need. It's fine to store our timestamps like that. We probably want to do that when we put this in some sort of data store. But when we actually display it for the user, they don't want to see this. So let's clean this up a little bit. And let's say when displaying the timestamps, just show the day, month. I don't even want to tell it exactly how to format it. Let's see what it does by default. And year. And AM, PM indicator. All right, so it's going through. Ooh, it wants us to add a package to our pubspec YAML. Is that necessary? I don't want to add anything in this episode, any dependencies, but that is a pretty common package. Okay. All right, this actually looks good. Let's go ahead and do that. So one thing that you'll note is it's updating our pubspec YAML. This is just a file that's in your project that has all your dependencies. And dependencies are just other people's code that they've generously contributed to the community that you can then use in your code. INTL, I believe, is an internationalization package. So it probably has information about time zones, and it's able to convert time for the specific region that you're in when you're using the app. So this seems like a pretty safe thing to add. Now, before using any package, I like to just check if it's the latest version. Sometimes Cursor might be a little bit outdated, or Claude, whatever model it's using. So we're just going to, I'm going to pull up my browser here, and I'm going to say Flutter INTL package. Okay, there it is. It's on pubdev. And you can see that it isn't the most recent. So the most recent version is 0.19.0. And you might as well, if you're adding a package, use the most recent one. So we're going to do that. So we're just going to copy the code that Cursor said. We're add it to our pubspec. Now, I could have it just apply it, but because I didn't add pubspec YAML to the files under consideration, it's not going to be able to do that. It's going to try to wedge it somehow into main.dart. So we could do two things. We could rerun this and add pubspec YAML to it, or we could just copy and paste it into our pub spec. So I'm just going to do that for simplicity's sake. So I'll scroll down here and grab this. I could just type this in too. And let's add it to our dependency section. So right now all our dependencies are just Flutter. So we're going to add our first external dependency, intl, and you got to make sure it's indented properly. Like this is, each item should be at the same level, and then any configuration should be indented to there. All right, so we know it's 19, so we're going to save that. And whenever you save in Cursor or Visual Studio Code, it's going to try to install that dependency automatically. All right, so back to our actual objective here is to display prettier timestamps. So let's go ahead and apply that. Sometimes these chats get long and you end up scrolling a lot, but if you just scroll to the bottom, you can push it up. Okay, so it's adding that package. That's great, we'll accept that. And we'll go to the next change. It added this function to format the timestamp. It's nice to encapsulate it in its own function, so that seems like a good idea. And here, instead of just dumping out the raw string, it's going to call format timestamp. This looks good. All right, so we're going to accept everything else. We'll save it, and we'll refresh our app. Ah, there we go. Much better. It's got the actual date, April 1st, 2023. It's got the time. Now, eventually I probably want to have the timestamp just kind of be on the left and then have the thought be on the right, but this might be a better interface because you don't know how long the thought's going to be and you don't want to waste a lot of space. So this is actually a good suggestion. It was not what I was originally thinking, but this should be all we need. So there you go. And you can even see the number of thoughts captured is 8, which represents the number of items in our JSON. Let's try one more thing just to prove that it's working to ourselves. Instead of lorem ipsum for this first entry, let's add an actual thought. Let's do an episode on using Cursor's documentation feature. And we're going to save it. And I think I have to refresh. See, hot reload does have its limitations. Once a variable's been initialized, sometimes it doesn't capture it. But there we go. Let's do an episode on using Cursor's documentation feature. All right, so there you have it. We took a photo, a really horribly drawn photo from earlier. We fed it to Cursor, and it created our user interface. I mean, we didn't have to write all that kind of boilerplate code. And this is great. In the next episode, we're going to make this app actually do something. So it's cool to have the sample data so we can play around with it and get the dashboard to look the way we want it. But we want to actually be able to add new entries using voice to text. Thanks for tuning in.